In the vast and silent cosmos of ancient Egyptian belief, all life, all order, and all time began with a single overwhelming presence. Before the first pharaoh, before the first stone of the first pyramid was laid, there was the light. And that light had a name. It was Ra. He was not simply a god among many. For much of Egypt's history, he was the undisputed king of the gods, the father of creation, the divine force whose daily journey was the very heartbeat of the universe. To look upon him was to look upon the sun itself. He was most often seen as a powerful man with the head of a majestic falcon, the keenest-eyed creature of the sky. And upon his head, he wore not a crown of gold, but the source of his power, a blazing sun disk, encircled and protected by the Uraeus, a sacred cobra ready to spit fire at any who dared challenge the Lord of Light. The story of Ra is not one of singular myths or grand battles fought on earth. Instead, his is a story of an eternal, repeating cycle. A daily promise, written in the sky, that life would always continue, that order would always triumph over chaos, and that light would always return to banish the darkness. His journey was the most important event in the cosmos, a celestial ritual that happened every single day. It begins at dawn, as the eastern sky begins to soften from black to a deep violet. The Egyptians believed that the sky goddess, Nut, was giving birth to the sun. This newborn sun was Ra in his first form of the day, Khepri, the scarab beetle. It is a strange image to us, but to the Egyptians, it was a symbol of profound power. They would watch the humble dung beetle rolling a perfect sphere of dung across the sand, from which new beetles would later emerge as if from nothing. In the same way, Khepri, the scarab god, rolled the great ball of the sun over the horizon, bringing new life and a new day into existence. As he was born into the world, Ra would step aboard his magnificent celestial boat, known as the Manjet, or the bark of millions of years. This was no simple vessel of wood and reeds. It was a divine ship of gold and lapis lazuli, which sailed not upon water, but upon the great blue ocean of the sky. Ra did not sail alone. He was accompanied by a host of other gods who served as his divine crew, each with a vital role to play in ensuring the success of his journey. The wise god Thoth often stood at the helm, navigating the celestial pathways, while the goddess Ma'at, the very embodiment of cosmic order, stood at the prow, ensuring the journey was true and just. As the sun climbed higher, Ra would transform. At midday, at the peak of his power, he became Ra Horakhti, a fusion of his own identity and that of the sky god Horus. This was Ra at his most magnificent, the blazing falcon in the sky, shining down his warmth and light upon the land of Egypt. His rays were the source of all growth, the reason the barley and wheat in the fields grew tall. His light was the source of all life. He saw everything, knew everything, and his presence was a sign that the world was stable, that Ma'at was in control. As the afternoon would wane, Ra would begin his descent, aging with the day. He would become Atum, the wise, old creator god, his light softening into the warm, golden hues of sunset. He would sail toward the western horizon, the land of the dead, preparing to be swallowed by the sky goddess Nut, thus ending the day. But for Ra, this was not an end. It was the beginning of the most dangerous and important part of his journey. For the 12 hours of the night, Ra had to travel through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. This was not a hell of punishment, but a mysterious and chaotic realm of darkness, populated by gods, spirits, and terrifying monsters. To make this journey, he would leave his day boat and board the Mesiktet, his night bark. His form would change once more. He became a ram-headed man, the form in which he was worshipped as the soul of the sun, bringing light even to the dead. His journey through the 12 regions of the Duat, one for each hour of the night, was filled with peril. Every night, he had to face his ultimate enemy, Apep, the great serpent of chaos. Apep was a creature of unimaginable size, a serpent whose coils were said to stretch for miles, lurking in the dark waters of the underworld. He was the embodiment of Isfet, or chaos, the opposite of everything Ra stood for. His goal was simple and terrifying: to swallow the solar boat and its divine light, and in doing so, to end creation and return the universe to the formless darkness from which it came. The battle was fought every single night. As Apep attacked, the gods on the boat would fight back. This is where the story takes a fascinating turn. One of the greatest defenders of Ra's boat was none other than Set, the god of chaos himself. Set, the murderer of Osiris, would stand at the prow of the boat and use his violent, chaotic power to spear the great serpent, driving him back. It was a powerful message. Even chaos itself had a role to play in the maintenance of divine order. But Ra's nightly journey was not just a battle. As he traveled, his light was a gift to those who had passed on. He brought a moment of light and life to the souls of the dead, allowing them to exist in the afterlife. In the deepest hour of the night, his soul would merge with that of Osiris, the king of the dead. In this moment, Ra, the god of life, and Osiris, the god of the dead, became one. It was a union of creation and resurrection, a powerful symbol that life and death were not opposites, but two parts of the same eternal cycle. After passing all the trials of the Duat and defeating Apep once more, Ra would reach the eastern horizon just as dawn approached. He would emerge from the underworld, leaving Osiris to rule over the dead, and be reborn once more from the sky goddess Nut as Khepri, the scarab beetle, to begin his journey anew. This daily victory was the ultimate proof that life would always triumph over death, and order would always conquer chaos. It was a promise, written in golden light across the sky, that for the people of Egypt and for the entire universe, there would always be a new day. From the blazing, untouchable glory of the sun god Ra, we now descend to the rich, dark earth of the Nile Valley. For after the world was created, it needed a king. The gods decided that Ra's own great-grandson would be the one to rule over humanity, to teach them and to guide them. His name was Osiris, and his story is the most human, the most tragic, and ultimately the most hopeful in all of Egyptian mythology. Where Ra was the lord of the sky, Osiris was the king of the earth. He was the great civilizing hero. He was not a god of distant cosmic power, but a gentle, benevolent ruler who walked among his people. His appearance tells his story. He was depicted as a handsome, mummified man. his skin often painted green to represent the vibrant new life of vegetation that sprouts from the dark soil after the Nile's flood. He wore the tall white Atef crown of kingship and held in his hands the symbols of his rule, the crook of a shepherd, to show he guided his people, and the flail of a farmer, to show he provided them with sustenance. Before Osiris, the people of Egypt were said to live in a primitive, uncivilized state. It was Osiris who taught them the secrets of agriculture, how to cultivate the life-giving grains of wheat and barley. He showed them how to turn their harvests into bread, a staple of life, and how to brew the nourishing drink of beer. He gave them the first laws, creating a society of justice and order. And he taught them how to honor and worship the gods. Alongside his sister wife, the wise and powerful goddess Isis, he reigned over a golden age. The world was in a state of perfect balance. The harvest was always plentiful. The people were happy. And Ma'at, the principle of cosmic order, reigned supreme on earth. But where there is perfect order, there is often a shadow of chaos waiting. And that shadow was Osiris's own brother, Set. Set was the lord of the Red Land, the harsh, sterile desert that bordered the fertile black land of the Nile Valley. He was the embodiment of everything that Osiris was not. He was chaos, violence, envy, and the untamable rage of the storm. He looked upon the paradise his brother had created, and his heart filled with a burning jealousy. He desired the throne for himself and began to plot a way to dispose of the good king. Set's plan was one of cunning deception. He secretly obtained the exact measurements of Osiris's body and commissioned his craftsmen to build the most beautiful and magnificent chest the world had ever seen. It was crafted from the finest cedar wood, inlaid with shimmering gold, silver, and precious stones. He then threw a grand feast and invited all the gods, including his unsuspecting brother. Imagine the scene. A great hall filled with divine beings, music, and celebration. As the feast reached its height, Set had the magnificent chest brought before the guests. He announced that he would give this priceless treasure to whoever could fit inside it perfectly. One by one, the gods tried. One was too tall, another too short. They laughed and enjoyed the game, none of them aware of its sinister purpose. Finally, it was Osiris's turn. He admired the chest's beauty, and, with a trusting smile, he lay down inside it. It fit him as if it had been made for him alone. But the moment he was inside, the mood of the hall turned dark. Set and his 72 conspirators slammed the heavy lid shut, sealing it fast with nails and molten lead. The perfect coffin was now a prison. The joyous feast had become a scene of betrayal. The conspirators then carried the heavy chest to the banks of the Nile and cast it into the river. The gentle river that had brought so much life to Egypt now carried its beloved king away in a coffin of death. With Osiris gone, Ma'at was broken. Chaos had triumphed, and a great sorrow fell upon the land. The grief of Isis was immeasurable. She cut her hair and tore her robes in mourning, but her sorrow quickly turned into an unbreakable resolve. She would not let her husband be lost forever, and so began her great quest. She searched tirelessly, wandering the length and breadth of Egypt, asking everyone she met if they had seen the magnificent chest. The chest, meanwhile, had floated down the Nile, out into the great sea and eventually washed ashore in the distant land of Byblos, in modern-day Lebanon. There, a sacred tamarisk tree grew around it, enclosing the coffin of the god completely within its trunk. The tree grew so tall and so beautiful that the local king, not knowing the secret it held, had it cut down and made into a grand pillar for his palace. But nothing could be hidden from the magic of Isis. She eventually traced the chest to Byblos, and, using her divine wisdom, she revealed herself to the queen and was given the pillar. She cut it open, retrieved the chest, and began the long journey home to Egypt. She hid her husband's body in the thick, protective marshes of the Nile Delta, and, using her profound magic, she took the form of a kite, a swift and graceful bird. She flapped her great wings over Osiris, breathing air back into his lungs, and by the sheer power of her love and her magic, she resurrected him. It was only for a moment, but it was long enough for them to conceive their divine child, Horus, who would one day avenge his father. Osiris, however, having passed through the gates of death, could no longer rule in the land of the living. His destiny had been changed forever. He journeyed to the Duat, the underworld, and there he became what he was always meant to be, the just and merciful king of the afterlife. This was not a sad fate. It was a transformation that brought hope to every Egyptian. Osiris became the ultimate promise of resurrection. He was the proof that death was not an end, but merely a doorway to a new and eternal existence. He sat on his throne in the Hall of Two Truths, where he would welcome the souls of the dead who had been judged worthy. His kingdom was not a place of shadow and sorrow, but the beautiful, idealized paradise known as the Field of Reeds. Every Egyptian who lived and died hoped to become an Osiris. Through the rituals of mummification and the spells of the Book of the Dead, they too could conquer death, just as their first king had. Osiris, the good king who was betrayed and reborn, transformed the concept of death from a terrifying finality into a hopeful continuation of life, a final peaceful journey home. In the brilliant pantheon of the Nile, some gods ruled with raw power and others with silent authority, but one goddess reigned through a power that was more subtle, more pervasive, and ultimately more potent than any other: the power of magic. She was Isis, known as the Great Enchantress, a goddess of so many forms and roles that she was often called the One Who Is All Names. Her own Egyptian name, Iset, means throne, and her original headdress was the image of a royal throne, signifying that she was the very foundation of the pharaoh's power. She was the divine mother of the king, and through her, his right to rule was established. In later times, she was often shown with the horns of a cow and the sun disk of Hathor, a sign of how she absorbed the qualities of other great goddesses, becoming a universal figure of divine femininity. At other times, she is depicted with magnificent protective wings, a symbol of her ability to shelter and resurrect the ones she loves. But to truly understand Isis, we must understand her brilliant, cunning mind. Her power was not a gift, but something she earned through sheer intellect and audacity, in a story that took place long before the tragedy of her husband. It involves the great sun god Ra himself. As Ra grew old, ruling from the earth, a dribble of saliva fell from his mouth and onto the ground. Isis, ever watchful, saw this. She knew that Ra held his ultimate power in his secret, true name. If she could learn that name, she could wield a power equal to his, a power she believed she could use to better protect the world. She quietly collected the earth that had mixed with Ra's saliva, and, using her innate magic, she molded it into the form of the world's first cobra. She placed this magical serpent on the path where Ra walked each day. As the old god passed by, the serpent struck, sinking its venom into him. Ra let out a cry that was heard across the heavens. A fire-like poison coursed through his veins, an agony so great that not even he, the king of the gods, could command it to stop. All the other gods rushed to his side, but their spells and incantations were useless. The poison had been created by magic that was tied to Ra himself. Only knowledge of his secret name could undo it. It was then that Isis came forward, her expression one of calm concern. She offered to help, to use her skills to heal him. But, she explained, for her spells to work against a poison so divine, she would need to invoke his true, secret name. Ra, in his torment, tried to deflect. He listed his many public names. I am Khepri in the morning, Ra at midday, and Atum in the evening. But Isis was not fooled. She knew these were titles, not the secret name of power. The poison burned hotter, and finally, the great god could bear it no more. He had the other gods step away, and in a whisper that only Isis could hear, he allowed his secret name to pass from his heart into hers. Instantly, Isis was filled with a divine power unlike any other. She became the mistress of magic. With a simple incantation, she commanded the poison to leave Ra's body, healing him completely. This story is not one of betrayal, but of a transfer of power. Isis had proven that her intelligence was a force capable of matching even the sun god, and she would soon need every ounce of that power. Her most famous story, of course, is one of unwavering devotion. As we have heard, her idyllic life as queen alongside her husband Osiris was shattered by the jealous betrayal of their brother Set. When Set cast Osiris into the Nile in a sealed chest, it was Isis who refused to let chaos win. While others mourned, she acted. Her quest to find her husband became the stuff of legend. She wandered the entire land, a solitary figure of grief and resolve, questioning everyone, from children to the gods themselves, following the faintest of clues. Her search led her across the sea to the city of Byblos. There, she discovered that the chest containing her husband had been miraculously encased within the trunk of a great tamarisk tree, which had then been made into a pillar in the royal palace. Her wisdom and magic were her only tools. She disguised herself as an old woman and sat by the city well, where she befriended the handmaidens of the queen. She used her magic to braid their hair and perfume them with a divine fragrance. When the queen met her, she was so impressed by her wisdom that she made Isis the nursemaid to the infant prince. Isis cared for the child, but each night she would secretly place him in a ritual fire to burn away his mortality and make him immortal. When the queen discovered this, she screamed in terror, breaking the spell. It was then that Isis revealed her true, divine form. Overcome with awe and gratitude, the king and queen gave her the pillar she desired. She cut it open, and at last, she was reunited with her husband's coffin. Her journey was one of sorrow, but also of incredible strength, and the story was not yet over. Upon her return to Egypt, Set, in a final act of hatred, found the body of Osiris and dismembered it, scattering the pieces across the length of the Nile. For any other, this would have been the final, horrifying end. For Isis, it was simply the ultimate test of her devotion. Patiently, tirelessly, she journeyed from one end of Egypt to the other, finding and consecrating every piece of her beloved. Where she did, a temple was often built. Through her actions, she was not just remembering her husband, she was making the land of Egypt sacred and whole again. It was this profound devotion that allowed her to perform her greatest feat of magic, the resurrection and the conception of her son, Horus. And with his birth, her role transformed once more. She became the divine mother, the ultimate protector. To keep the infant Horus safe from Set, who now ruled the land, she hid him in the dense, impenetrable papyrus swamps of the Nile Delta. The images of her from this time are some of the most beautiful in Egyptian art. The goddess, seated on a throne of reeds, tenderly nursing her divine child. She used her magic to ward off the dangers of the swamp, scorpions, snakes, and all manner of threats, becoming the fierce protector of her son, and by extension, of all children. Isis was everything: the cunning magician, the devoted wife, the fierce mother, the queen of the gods. Her story was so powerful that her worship spread far beyond the borders of Egypt. In the age of the Greeks and Romans, temples to Isis were built in every corner of their empire, from London to Pompeii. She became a universal goddess, a symbol of hope, love, and the promise that even in the face of the greatest darkness, the power of devotion could bring about a miraculous rebirth. In the aftermath of the world's first great tragedy, with the good king Osiris reigning over the silent kingdom of the dead, the world of the living was left in the iron grip of the chaotic god, Set. Order had been broken, and the rightful line of kingship was severed. But in the dense, secret heart of the Nile Delta, a promise was growing. A child, conceived by magic and protected by a mother's fierce devotion, was being raised to fulfill his destiny. This was Horus, the son of Isis and Osiris. His is the story of the rightful heir, the heroic avenger, and the divine model for every pharaoh who would ever rule Egypt. His very nature was that of a king. He was the falcon, the majestic predator who soars high above the earth, his keen eyes seeing all below him. He was depicted as a powerful man with the head of this sacred bird, and on his brow he wore the pashent, the double crown of red and white, for he was born to rule a united land. His story is the ultimate triumph of order over chaos, of a son's duty to his father. His life began not in a grand palace, but in hiding. To protect her precious child from the murderous rage of his uncle Set, Isis took the infant Horus deep into the impenetrable papyrus swamps of the Delta. Imagine this secret world, a labyrinth of towering green reeds rustling in the gentle breeze. The air, thick with the scent of water lilies and damp earth. The only sounds were the soft lapping of the water and the calls of wild birds. Here, in this cradle of nature, Isis raised her son. This peaceful isolation, however, was filled with danger. Set's influence was everywhere, and his agents, venomous snakes and scorpions, lurked in the shadows. But Isis was the goddess of magic, and her protection over her son, Osiris, was absolute. She would sing magical lullabies, spells of protection, to keep him safe as he slept. There are famous stories of the young Horus being stung by a scorpion, his body racked with a deadly poison. In her desperation, the great goddess Isis commanded the sunboat of Ra to stand still in the sky until the other gods lent their power to heal her son. Even as a child, his life was so crucial to the cosmic order that all of creation would pause to ensure his survival. And so, surrounded by magic and nature, the boy grew into a powerful young god. His body became strong, his mind sharp, and his heart filled with a single driving purpose: to confront the usurper Set and reclaim the throne that rightfully belonged to his father, Osiris. When he came of age, Horus journeyed to the great tribunal of the gods and issued his challenge. And so began the great contention, a divine struggle between Horus and Set that was said to have lasted for 80 long years. This was not just a simple war of brute force, but a series of epic contests and magical trials, judged by the assembled gods themselves. The tribunal was divided. Ra, the king of the gods, initially favored Set. He saw Set as a god of immense strength and power, a worthy and experienced ruler. But the other gods, prompted by the eloquent and persuasive arguments of Isis, saw the justice in Horus's claim as the rightful heir. And so they decreed that the matter should be settled by a series of contests. In one famous trial, they agreed to a race in boats made of stone. Set, ever confident in his strength, hewed a great boat from a mountainside, but as soon as he placed it in the river, it sank to the bottom. Horus, meanwhile, used his cunning. He fashioned a boat from pine wood and covered it with a thin layer of plaster, making it look exactly like stone. His light, clever vessel sailed easily down the river, and he won the race, proving that intelligence could triumph over brute force. In another contest, they transformed themselves into two giant hippopotami to do battle in the depths of the Nile, a great trial of strength and endurance. But the heart of their conflict was a direct, personal struggle, and in one of their fierce battles, Set struck a terrible blow. He tore out Horus's left eye, ripped it to shreds, and cast it away. The sky was plunged into a moment of darkness, but the magical eye was not lost forever. It was found and painstakingly restored by the wise god Thoth, or in some stories, by the gentle goddess Hathor. Thoth used his magic to heal the eye, making it whole and even more powerful than before. This restored eye became the Wadjet eye, one of the most famous symbols of all of Egypt. It was a symbol of healing, restoration, protection, and wholeness. It represented the light of the moon, which also waxes and wanes, but is always reborn. After 80 years of these epic trials, the gods finally made their ruling. With a final judgment from the resurrected Osiris himself, speaking from the underworld, Horus was declared the one true and rightful king of Egypt. His coronation was a moment of immense cosmic significance. He was brought to the temple, and upon his head was placed the double crown, symbolizing the final, permanent unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under one divine ruler. Order was restored. Ma'at was triumphant. The first act of Horus as king was one of piety and love. He journeyed to the underworld to see his father, Osiris. He performed the sacred opening of the mouth ceremony for him, restoring his father's senses and allowing him to live a full and complete life as the king of the dead. His quest for vengeance was complete, and his duty as a son was fulfilled. From that moment on, Horus became the divine model for every earthly pharaoh. The king of Egypt was not merely a man. He was the living incarnation of Horus on the throne. The spirit of the falcon god resided within him, guiding his actions and legitimizing his rule. When a pharaoh died, he would become Osiris, and his son, the new pharaoh, would become the new Horus. It was a perfect, unbroken chain of divine succession. And so, the story of Horus is the story of kingship itself. He is the ever-watchful falcon, circling high in the sky, a symbol of power, protection, and the promise that after every period of darkness and chaos, a rightful king will rise to restore the light. In every great story, for there to be a hero, there must be a villain. For there to be light, there must be a shadow. In the Egyptian pantheon, this great shadow was cast by a god of immense power and unpredictable fury. He was Set, the brother of the good king Osiris, and the eternal adversary of the rightful heir, Horus. He was the god of everything the ancient Egyptians both feared and respected: the violent storms, the unforgiving red desert, and the strange foreign lands that lay beyond their own borders. His appearance was as strange and unique as his nature. He was depicted as a tall, muscular man with the head of an unknown creature, often called the Set animal. It had a long, curved snout, tall, squared-off ears, and a forked tail. No living animal has ever been identified that matches it, making him a true figure of myth. His hair and his eyes were said to be a fiery red, the color of the desert sands, a color that symbolized chaos and danger. To understand Set, we must understand the landscape of Egypt itself. The Egyptians called their home Kemet, the Black Land, named for the fertile, life-giving silt of the Nile Valley. This was the domain of Osiris and Horus, a place of order, predictability, and life. But surrounding this valley on all sides was the Deshret, the Red Land. This was the vast, scorching desert, a place of death, chaos, and immense, untamable power. This was the kingdom of Set. He was not evil, in their eyes, so much as he was a necessary and powerful opposing force. His strength was legendary, and for this, he was revered. He was a god of the military, and many pharaohs, particularly the great warrior kings of the New Kingdom, would call upon Set to give them strength in battle. Some even took his name, like the great pharaoh Seti I, whose name means man of Set. He was a symbol of the ferocious, untamed power needed to protect Egypt from its enemies. But we cannot ignore his role as the great antagonist in the central myth of Osiris. As we have heard, it was his burning jealousy of his brother's perfect kingdom that led him to commit the world's first great crime. He was the one who tricked Osiris, sealed him in a magnificent chest, and cast him into the Nile. He was the one who usurped the throne and plunged the world into an age of chaos. His struggle with his nephew Horus was a battle for the very soul of Egypt. For 80 years, they contended for the crown, and in their struggles, Set represented the rule of might and brute force, in direct opposition to Horus, who represented the rule of law and rightful inheritance. In these stories, Set is the villain. He is the source of all the pain and sorrow that befell the divine family. He is the one who broke Ma'at, the cosmic order, and had to be defeated for the world to be made whole again. And in the end, he was defeated. The tribunal of the gods declared Horus the rightful king, and Set was forced to relinquish the throne. But here is where his story becomes so fascinating. Set was not destroyed. He was not banished to the dark corners of the universe. He was simply put back in his proper place, because the Egyptians understood that his power, though chaotic, was too important to be eliminated entirely. The world, they knew, could not exist with only order. It needed a counterweight. It needed the desert as well as the valley. It needed the storm as well as the calm. And his true, essential purpose was revealed every single night in the heavens above. As we have heard, the sun god Ra had to journey through the perilous underworld for 12 hours, battling the forces of darkness to be reborn at dawn. His greatest enemy was the serpent Apep, a creature of absolute chaos, whose only goal was to swallow the sun and unmake creation. Every night, as Apep attacked the solar boat, a great champion would stand at the prow to defend the light. This champion was none other than Set. He, the god of chaos, was the only one with the raw, violent strength to stand against the ultimate chaos of Apep. With his mighty spear, he would fight off the serpent, wounding it and driving it back into the depths. This is the profound duality of Set. He is the murderer of Osiris, but the bodyguard of Ra. He is the usurper of the earthly throne, but the defender of the cosmic throne. He shows that the ancient Egyptians had a remarkably sophisticated understanding of the world. They knew that the same forces that could cause great destruction could also be a source of immense strength and protection. Set is the reminder that not everything in the universe can be neatly categorized as good or evil. He is the embodiment of the powerful, unpredictable, and often dangerous forces of nature. He is the storm that can destroy the harvest, but also the strength that can defend the nation. He is the necessary chaos that makes the existence of order all the more precious. In the Egyptian mind, the moment of death was not an ending, but a profound transition. It was a step across a sacred threshold, from the world of the living into the vast, mysterious landscape of the Duat, the underworld. And to make this journey, you were not left alone. The first being you would meet, the one who would take you by the hand and guide you into the twilight, was the god Anubis. His image is one of the most striking in all of mythology. A powerful, graceful man with the head of a jet-black jackal. To us, the jackal might seem a fearsome or morbid symbol, but to the Egyptians, it was a creature of profound significance. They would watch the jackals prowling silently along the edges of the desert, in the very places where they built their necropolises, their cities of the dead. They did not see a scavenger, but a natural, watchful guardian of these sacred spaces. And his color, a deep and glossy black, was not the color of death. It was the color of the rich, fertile silt of the Nile, a symbol of regeneration and new life. It was also the color that a body would turn during the sacred process of mummification. Anubis was not a king who gave grand pronouncements, nor a god of violent, cosmic battles. He was a god of quiet expertise, the master of the sacred arts of embalming and the compassionate guide for all who were beginning their final journey. His presence was not one to be feared, but one of great comfort. His story is woven into the very fabric of the Osiris myth. In fact, his most important role was born from that first great tragedy. When the good king Osiris was murdered by his brother Set, it was Anubis who, along with the devoted Isis, performed the world's very first mummification. He was the divine embalmer. The legends say that it was he who meticulously prepared Osiris's body, cleansing it, anointing it with sacred oils and fragrant resins, and wrapping it in hundreds of yards of fine white linen. This was not a mere physical act. It was a deep, magical ritual. Each step, each incantation, was designed to preserve the physical form so that the soul could one day return to it. Anubis, through this act of piety for the fallen king, became the patron god of all embalmers, the master of the Wabbit, the place of purification. The priests who performed this sacred task for mortals were considered servants of Anubis, following in his divine footsteps, ensuring that every person, not just the king, could be made eternal. But his duties only began with the preservation of the body. Once the funeral rites were complete and the tomb was sealed, Anubis's next great role would commence. He was the psychopomp, the gentle conductor of souls. The path through the underworld was a difficult and confusing one, filled with strange landscapes, gates guarded by fearsome demons, and trials that could confound the uninitiated. But the soul of the deceased would not have to face this alone. Anubis would appear, a calm and reassuring presence in the darkness, and would gently take the soul by the hand. Imagine that moment of transition, leaving behind everything you have ever known, and stepping into a world of shadow and spirit. The presence of this loyal, jackal-headed god would have been a source of immense comfort, a promise that you were being cared for, that you were on the right path. He would lead the soul through the winding pathways of the Duat, knowing all the secret routes and the magical passwords needed to bypass the dangers that lurked there. He was the trusted guide who ensured your safe arrival at your final destination, the Great Hall of Two Truths, where your ultimate fate would be decided. And it is here, in this vast and silent Hall of Judgment, that Anubis performs his most famous and crucial role. While the great god Osiris sits upon his throne as the ultimate judge, and the wise god Thoth stands ready with his scribe's palette to record the verdict, it is Anubis who is the master of the ceremony. He is the guardian of the great golden scales, the impartial technician of the final judgment. His movements are precise and deliberate, filled with a sacred solemnity. He would lead the trembling soul of the deceased before the scales. With a steady hand, he would reach into the chest of the soul and remove the heart, the vessel of their conscience, their thoughts, and all the deeds of their life. He would place the heart on one of the golden pans. On the other, he would place the single pure white feather of the goddess Ma'at, the symbol of truth and cosmic order. Anubis would then check the balance. His focus would be absolute, his gaze intent. He was not there to judge, but to ensure that the judgment was true. He was the one who guaranteed the integrity of the process, making sure the scales were perfectly balanced, and that the heart could tell its own story against the unyielding weight of the truth. He was a figure of absolute impartiality. It did not matter if you were a pharaoh or a farmer. The scales, under the watchful eye of Anubis, would render the same fair verdict for all. And so, the image of the jackal god, which might at first seem frightening, was, in fact, one of the most comforting in the entire Egyptian pantheon. He was the loyal god who created the means for eternal life through mummification. He was the gentle guide who promised you would not be alone on your most perilous journey. And he was the master of the scales, who ensured that the life you lived would be judged with fairness and truth. Anubis was the promise that when your time in the sun was over, a loyal guardian would be waiting for you at the threshold, ready to lead you home. In the grand hall of the afterlife, after the heart has been weighed and its truth revealed, the final verdict must be recorded for all of eternity. The being entrusted with this sacred and irreversible task was a god of immense intellect and unimpeachable integrity. He was Thoth, the divine scribe, the voice of reason in a pantheon of passionate and powerful gods. His domain was the mind itself. He was the god of wisdom, knowledge, mathematics, astronomy, and magic. His presence was a calm and thoughtful one, a counterbalance to the raw power of gods, like Ra and the chaotic fury of Set. He was most often depicted as a man with the head of a sacred ibis, a graceful bird seen wading in the shallows of the Nile. The Egyptians would watch the ibis dipping its long, curved beak into the dark water to find food, and in that elegant motion, they saw a living pen, dipping itself into a pot of black ink. In other times, he was shown as a wise and contemplative baboon, an animal the Egyptians observed to be intelligent and thoughtful. But Thoth's greatest gift to the universe, the act that truly defined him, was the invention of writing. Imagine a world without the written word, a world where knowledge existed only in memory and spoken tales, as fleeting as a breath on the desert wind. Thoth, in his infinite wisdom, sought a way to capture thoughts, to give ideas permanence, and to preserve knowledge forever. And so, he created the sacred symbols, the Medu Neter, the words of the gods, the hieroglyphs. To the Egyptians, these were not just letters or pictures. Each symbol was imbued with a magical creative power. The image of a bird was not just a symbol for a sound. It held the very essence of the bird itself. Writing was a magical act, and every scribe, patiently practicing his craft on a roll of papyrus, was a servant of Thoth, participating in this divine art of giving thoughts an eternal body. He was the patron of every library, every school, and every scholar in Egypt. Because of his great wisdom, Thoth was the trusted counselor and arbiter among the gods. In a family of powerful, emotional deities, he was the calm, logical mind they turned to for solutions. During the epic 80-year struggle between Horus and Set for the throne of Egypt, it was Thoth who acted as the court clerk, patiently recording the events of every trial. He was not a passive observer. He was the one who often suggested the clever contests to test the rivals, and he was the one who healed them when their conflict became too violent. When Set tore out Horus's eye, it was Thoth who found the pieces and, using his potent magic and healing knowledge, stitched the eye back together, making it whole and even more powerful than before. In this act, he restored not just Horus's sight, but the balance of the cosmos itself. The restored eye of Horus became a symbol of his healing power, a potent amulet used by all Egyptians to ward off sickness and evil. His intelligence was not just limited to magic and law. He was the divine architect of time and space. As the god of the moon, He was the counterpart to the sun god Ra. While Ra governed the day, Thoth governed the night, measuring the passing of the hours and charting the movement of the stars. The gentle silver light of the moon was seen as his presence, a calm and steady light in the darkness. This connection to the cycles of the moon led to one of his most clever tales. The ancient Egyptian calendar was originally only 360 days long, which caused the seasons to drift out of alignment. The story goes that the sky goddess Nut was forbidden by Ra from giving birth on any of the 360 days of the year. In a bind, she turned to the wise Thoth for help. Thoth went to the moon god, Khonsu, and challenged him to a game of Senet, the ancient board game of strategy. Thoth played with such skill that he won a small fraction of the moon's light from Khonsu with each victory. He continued to play until he had won enough light to create 5 new days, which he added to the end of the 360-day calendar. Because these 5 days were not part of the original year, Nut was free to give birth to her 5 divine children: Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys, and Horus the Elder. Through his cleverness, Thoth had not only fixed the calendar, but had also enabled the birth of the most important gods in the entire pantheon. This is the essence of Thoth. He is the divine problem solver, the one who uses intellect and knowledge, not brute force, to maintain cosmic order. And his ultimate role brought him back to the Hall of Two Truths, standing beside the scales of Anubis. As Anubis performed the weighing, it was Thoth, with his scribe's palette in hand, who would look at the result and declare it to be true. His word was final. His act of writing the verdict, "The soul is true of voice and is justified to enter the field of reeds," was the magical act that made the soul's entry into paradise official and eternal. Thoth was the keeper of all the secrets of the universe, the divine librarian whose knowledge was infinite. He represented the profound Egyptian belief that civilization is built not on power alone, but on wisdom, on the preserved word, and on the quiet, patient pursuit of understanding. He was the eternal mind of the universe, and in his sacred writings lay the map of eternity itself. In a world defined by the strict balance of Ma'at and the solemn journey to the afterlife, the ancient Egyptians also understood the profound importance of pure, simple joy. They cherished music, they celebrated love, and they saw divinity in a heartfelt laugh or a graceful dance. And the goddess who presided over all of these wonderful things, the one who filled their lives with light and happiness, was Hathor. She was one of the most ancient and widely beloved of all the deities. Her name can mean the House of Horus, signifying her role as both the mother and wife of the sky god in different myths. She was a goddess of the sky, but her true domain was the heart of humanity. She was the mistress of love, music, beauty, fertility, and joy. She was a celestial being, but her presence was felt most strongly in the happiest moments of mortal life. Her appearance was one of radiant beauty. She was most often depicted as a graceful woman, her face serene and gentle, wearing a headdress of 2 large cow horns, between which she cradled the brilliant sun disk of her father, Ra. In her earliest form, she was simply a great celestial cow whose star-dusted belly formed the sky and whose 4 legs stood at the corners of the earth. The cow was a symbol of gentle, unconditional motherhood and the nourishing milk of life. And Hathor was the divine mother to all. In her hand, she often carried a sistrum, a sacred rattle whose shimmering sound was said to please the gods and drive away all evil and sorrow. Her temples, especially her magnificent, beautifully preserved temple at Dendera, were not quiet, somber places of worship. They were vibrant centers of life and celebration. Her festivals were the most joyous in all of Egypt. Great processions would fill the streets. People would drink, feast, sing and dance with wild abandon. It was a time to cast off all worries and to fully embrace the pleasures of life, all as a sacred act of worship to the Golden One. The air would be filled with the sound of thousands of sistrums rattling in unison, a wave of sound to honor the goddess and celebrate the gift of existence. Hathor was the divine inspiration for all things beautiful. She was the goddess of love, the one a young man or woman might pray to for a happy marriage. She was the patron of cosmetics, and the polished bronze mirrors the Egyptians used were often shaped like her sacred sistrum. The act of applying kohl and malachite eyeshadow was not just for beauty, but a way of emulating the radiant eyes of the goddess. She was the Lady of Turquoise, a beautiful blue-green stone that the Egyptians cherished. The great turquoise mines in the Sinai Desert were considered her sacred territory, and the miners would leave offerings to her to ensure their safety and success. They believed each brilliant stone held a spark of her joyful spirit. While Isis was the archetypal mother who mourned and protected her single divine son, Hathor was a more universal maternal figure. She was the protector of all women, especially during childbirth, and she was a divine nursemaid to the pharaoh himself. In temple art, the pharaoh is often shown as a child, drinking the life-giving milk directly from Hathor in her cow form, an act that reaffirmed his divine nature and her role as his celestial mother. But Hathor's comforting, maternal presence was not limited to this world alone. In a role of beautiful tenderness, she also had a place in the afterlife. She was known as the Lady of the West, the direction in which the sun set, and where the journey to the underworld began. It was believed that Hathor, in the form of a great sacred sycamore tree, stood at the very edge of the mortal world, at the gateway to the desert necropolis. Imagine the soul of a person who had just passed away, taking their first tentative steps into the unknown. They would be weary, disoriented, and perhaps afraid. But the first being they would meet would be the gentle Hathor. She would emerge from her sacred tree, her expression one of peace and welcome. She would offer the soul a tray of fresh bread or sweet figs to eat. And most importantly, she would pour them a cup of cool, life-giving water from the Nile to quench their thirst. This was a final act of motherly care, a moment of comfort and nourishment to strengthen the soul before they were met by Anubis to begin their long journey through the Duat. Yet, this goddess of overwhelming love, music, and gentleness held a secret, terrifying duality. For every light casts a shadow, and the joy of Hathor was born from a moment of unimaginable fury. In a famous myth, the aging sun god Ra grew angry with humanity for plotting against him. In his rage, he sent his divine eye to punish them. But his eye was not a simple object. It was a goddess in its own right. It took the form of the most fearsome deity imaginable, the lioness goddess, Sekhmet. Sekhmet, whose story we shall hear next, went on a rampage of destruction, her bloodlust so great she nearly wiped out all of humanity. Fearing the world would be destroyed, Ra took pity on his creation. He ordered that thousands of jars of beer be dyed red with pomegranate juice to look like blood and poured out over the fields. The thirsty Sekhmet drank the red beer, became deeply intoxicated, and fell into a deep sleep. When she awoke, her rage had been pacified. The ferocious lioness had been transformed, and she arose once more as the gentle, loving goddess Hathor. And so the Egyptians understood that love and rage, creation and destruction, were two sides of the same divine coin. But it was Hathor they chose to fill their lives with. She was the golden light, the beautiful song, the comforting embrace. She was the reminder that even in a world of solemn gods and eternal journeys, the purpose of it all was to cherish the sweet, simple, and beautiful moments of life. From the gentle music and laughter of Hathor's festivals, we turn to a silence born not of peace, but of fear. We turn to the goddess whose name was spoken with a mix of reverence and dread, whose power was as swift and as final as a flash of lightning in the desert sky. She was Sekhmet, the goddess of war, plague, and divine retribution. Her name means the powerful one, and she was perhaps the most fearsome of all the gods. Her form was a direct manifestation of her untamable nature. She was depicted as a woman with the head of a lioness, the most formidable and efficient predator known to the Egyptians. Upon her head, she often wore the sun disk of her father, Ra, for she was his direct instrument of power. It was said that her breath was the hot, scorching wind of the desert, and that her body radiated an intense, shimmering heat. She was not a god to be loved, but one to be respected, and, above all else, to be pacified. Her story begins, as we have heard, with the rage of the sun god himself. In the twilight of his reign on earth, the aging Ra learned that humanity was conspiring against him, showing him disrespect and breaking the laws of Ma'at. His disappointment turned to fury. He plucked the divine Uraeus cobra from his brow, the very symbol of his power, and sent it to earth to execute his judgment. This divine power was his eye, an entity of immense and independent will, and as it descended upon the world, it took the form of Sekhmet. She was an incarnation of pure, divine wrath, a great and terrible huntress unleashed upon a world that had forgotten its place. The texts describe her rampage in terrifying terms. She moved like a wildfire through the land, her roar shaking the very mountains. She was the divine plague, the swift and bloody hand of justice, and she took to her task with a terrifying relish. Her thirst for destruction was insatiable, and soon the fields of Egypt were stained red. Her fury was so absolute that Ra himself began to have second thoughts. He had sent her to punish humanity, not to exterminate them entirely. But Sekhmet, lost in her bloodlust, would not listen. She could not be reasoned with or commanded. A direct confrontation was impossible. So, the wise god Thoth devised a clever plan. Ra commanded the Egyptians to brew thousands upon thousands of jars of beer. He then had them dye the beer a deep red with pomegranate juice and red ochre, until it looked exactly like a great lake of blood. They poured this lake of beer out over the fields, where Sekhmet was due to continue her rampage the next day. As dawn broke, the lioness goddess came forth, ready to continue her slaughter. She saw the vast red lake, and believing it to be the blood she so craved, she began to drink. She drank with a great thirst, consuming the entire lake. The potent beer quickly took its effect. Her divine rage began to cool, Her steps became unsteady, and finally, the fearsome goddess fell into a deep, drunken slumber. When she awoke, the murderous rage had passed. The divine fury was pacified, and the ferocious lioness was transformed, becoming once more the gentle and loving Hathor. The world was saved. But this story was not just a myth. It was a fundamental explanation of Sekhmet's dual nature, because she was the one who could unleash plague and pestilence upon the land. Her messengers were known as the arrows of Sekhmet that brought disease. She was also the only one powerful enough to cure it. And so, paradoxically, the goddess of destruction also became a powerful goddess of healing and medicine. Her priests were considered some of the most skilled physicians in all of Egypt. They understood that the goddess who could cause a sickness was the one who must be appeased to make it go away. The temples dedicated to Sekhmet were centers of medical knowledge. Her priests would perform complex rituals and recite magical spells to pacify the goddess's wrath and turn away illness from the people. To be a priest of Sekhmet was to be a master of both ritual and remedy, a spiritual doctor who knew how to handle the most dangerous divine forces. This fearsome power, when controlled, was also seen as a vital asset. Sekhmet was a powerful protector of the pharaoh, especially in times of war. The king on the battlefield was said to be like Sekhmet herself, his rage a consuming fire that destroyed Egypt's enemies. Her fiery breath was the arrow of the king, her roar the sound of his advancing army. Great pharaohs like Amenhotep III showed her immense respect, commissioning the construction of over 700 statues of her at the temple complex of Karnak. Imagine walking through the courts of the temple, surrounded on all sides by hundreds of these life-sized statues of the seated lioness goddess, each one carved from black granite, her silent, powerful gaze following you. It was a stark and constant reminder of her ever-present power. And so, Sekhmet completes the divine feminine, where Isis is the devoted, magical mother, and Hathor is the joyful, life-giving mother. Sekhmet is the fierce, protective mother. She is the one who will punish her children when they misbehave, but who will also turn upon any outside threat with an unmatchable fury. She represents the Egyptian understanding that some forces of nature are terrifying, but necessary. She is the purifying fire that clears the way for new growth. She is the plague that brings a new appreciation for health. She is the terrible and merciful goddess, the Lady of Flame, whose destructive power was the ultimate guardian of divine order. From the scorching heat of the desert and the terrifying roar of the lioness, we now draw close to the warmth of the family hearth. We turn from a goddess whose power could end the world to one whose presence made the world feel safe. She was one of the most popular and cherished deities in all of Egypt, a gentle protector whose spirit could be found in nearly every home. She was Bastet, the embodiment of the sacred watchful spirit of the cat. Her image is one of serene and elegant grace. She was most often depicted as a woman with the sleek, beautiful head of a domestic cat. In her hands, she often carried a sistrum, the sacred rattle, linking her to the joy and music of Hathor. She also held a protective aegis, a magical collar or breastplate, often decorated with the head of a lioness, a subtle reminder of her own fierce origins. But perhaps her most famous form was simply that of a seated black cat, its posture alert yet calm, a silent guardian watching over its domain. To understand Bastet, we must understand her deep and ancient connection to her ferocious sister, Sekhmet. In the earliest periods of Egyptian history, Bastet herself was a lioness goddess, a fierce warrior and a protector of the pharaoh. She was a daughter of the sun god Ra, another incarnation of the powerful Eye of Ra. She was the wild and untamable defender of Lower Egypt, just as Sekhmet was for Upper Egypt. But as the centuries passed, a remarkable transformation occurred. The domestic cat became an increasingly important part of Egyptian life. These were not just pets, they were vital working members of the household. They protected the precious grain stores from rats and mice, and they would kill venomous snakes, safeguarding the family from very real and present dangers. As the Egyptians domesticated the wild cat, so too did they domesticate their goddess. Her ferocious, warlike aspect was increasingly assigned to Sekhmet, while Bastet's nature softened. She transformed from a fearsome lioness into the gentle, loving, and fiercely protective domestic cat. Her story is a beautiful metaphor for civilization itself, the taming of a wild and dangerous force, and turning its power into a source of safety and comfort for the home. In this gentle form, Bastet became the guardian of the household. She was the protector of the family, warding off evil spirits and disease. Small statues of her, often showing a mother cat surrounded by a litter of kittens, were kept in the home as powerful amulets of protection. She became a goddess of fertility, and women would pray to her for the blessing of children and for safety during childbirth. While Sekhmet represented the scorching, destructive heat of the sun, Bastet came to represent its gentle, life-giving warmth. The Egyptians would watch the cats in their homes, seeking out patches of sunlight in which to sleep peacefully, and they saw in this a manifestation of the goddess herself, a symbol of quiet contentment and peace. The center of her worship was a great city in the Nile Delta called Bubastis. Here, she was worshipped with a joy and fervor that was unmatched by almost any other cult. The Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt in the 5th century BC, described the annual festival of Bastet as the most popular and extravagant in the entire country. He wrote of countless Egyptians traveling to the city on great barges. The boats would be filled with men and women, and the journey down the Nile was one great celebration. The people would play music on flutes and clap their hands, and the women would shake their sistrums. As they passed towns along the riverbank, they would sing, dance, and call out to the people on the shore in a spirit of joyful revelry. When they arrived at Bubastis, the festival would continue with great feasts, music, and vast quantities of wine. It was a time of pure, uninhibited joy, all in honor of the gentle goddess. The reverence for Bastet led to a profound respect for all cats. They were seen as the living incarnations of the goddess, and to harm a cat was considered a terrible crime, one that could be met with the most severe punishments. When a family's cat passed away, the household would enter a period of deep mourning, often shaving their eyebrows as a sign of their grief. The bodies of these sacred animals were treated with the same respect as humans. Archaeologists have discovered vast cat cemeteries at Bubastis and Saqqara, containing hundreds of thousands of mummified cats. Each one was carefully preserved, anointed with oils, and wrapped in intricate linen bandages, sometimes with a small painted mask placed over its face. These were not just pets. They were sacred offerings, sent to the goddess to act as messengers in the afterlife, carrying the prayers of the faithful. And so, the story of Bastet is a journey from terror to tenderness. She is the proof that the greatest strength can be found not in a deafening roar, but in a quiet, protective presence. She represents the Egyptian genius for finding balance, for seeing the same divine power in both the fearsome lioness and the gentle cat sleeping in a sunbeam. She was the constant, comforting guardian, a divine presence who turned a simple house into a safe and loving home. What was the ultimate purpose of all the great myths, the elaborate rituals, and the pharaoh's divine rule? What was the invisible thread that held the Egyptian universe together? It was not a god of the sun or a king of the dead, but a profound and beautiful idea, personified as a serene and graceful goddess. She was Ma'at, the embodiment of truth, justice, balance, harmony, and the perfect order of the cosmos. She was rarely the subject of dramatic personal myths like Isis or Horus. She did not engage in great battles or power struggles. Her power was of a different kind. It was quiet, constant, and absolute. She was depicted as a woman, always calm and poised, and on her head she wore her single unmistakable symbol, a perfect white ostrich feather. This feather represented everything she was. It was light, symmetrical, and pure. It was a symbol of a truth so absolute and so delicate that it could be weighed against a single feather. Ma'at was not a goddess who was created late in the story. She was present at the very moment of creation itself. When the first creator god, be it Atum or Ra, brought the world out of the dark, formless waters of chaos, the act of creation was the establishment of Ma'at. When he separated the earth from the sky, when he set the sun and moon on their predictable courses, and when he established the rhythmic cycle of the seasons and the Nile's flood, he was replacing the chaos known as Isfet with the divine order of Mi'at. From that moment on, the entire universe was seen as a delicate balance between these two forces. Isfet, the chaos, was the constant threat. It was violence, lies, injustice, and the terrifying darkness of the serpent Apep. Ma'at was its perfect opposite, and the purpose of all existence, from the gods down to the smallest creatures, was to uphold Ma'at and keep the forces of Isfet at bay. This was not just an abstract cosmic concept. It was a daily, practical guide for living. The single most important duty of the pharaoh was to be the champion of Ma'at on earth. He was not just a king who ruled by power, but the high priest whose every action was meant to maintain cosmic harmony. The laws he passed were meant to reflect the justice of Ma'at. The temples he built were centers of order that held back the chaos of the outside world. In a famous ritual depicted on temple walls, the pharaoh is often shown presenting a small statue of the goddess Ma'at to the other great gods. This was the ultimate offering, a symbol that his entire reign, his every action, was dedicated to upholding the divine truth she represented. But the responsibility of living in Ma'at extended to every single person. For a common Egyptian, it was the basis of all morality. To live a good life was to live a life of Ma'at. This meant being honest in your trade and your dealings with others. It meant caring for your family and respecting your elders. It meant being kind to those less fortunate and speaking truthfully. It meant living with a sense of community, harmony, and civic duty. To act with greed, deceit, or cruelty was not just a personal failing. It was an act that contributed to the chaos of Isfet, a small tear in the perfect fabric of the universe. And it was in the afterlife that the importance of a life lived in Ma'at became terrifyingly real and beautifully profound. This is her most iconic role in the Great Hall of Two Truths. As we have seen, the soul of the deceased would be guided by Anubis to a set of golden scales. But what was the meaning of this final judgment? It was the ultimate test of Ma'at. Imagine the scene once more, but focus now only on the scales. On one side, the heart of the deceased, containing every deed, every word, every thought from a lifetime. And on the other, the single impossibly light feather from the headdress of the goddess Ma'at. The question being asked was profound. Could a human heart, with all its complexities, its passions, its triumphs, and its failings, be as light and as pure as the feather of absolute truth? The soul would make its negative confession, declaring its innocence, essentially stating, "I have lived a life of Ma'at." And then the scales would render their silent verdict. If the heart was heavy with deceit, injustice, and evil, it would sink, and the soul would be consigned to oblivion. But if the person had lived a good and balanced life, their heart would be light. The scales would balance perfectly. The soul would be declared true of voice, a confirmation that their life had been in harmony with the cosmic order. This is why Ma'at was so central to the Egyptian soul. She was not a goddess you prayed to for favors or intervention. Instead, she was the unchanging standard against which your entire existence would one day be measured. She had very few temples dedicated to her, because her true temple was meant to be the entire world, and her true place of worship was in the honest heart of every person. Ma'at was the silent, eternal rhythm of the universe. She was the predictable rising of the sun, the gentle flowing of the Nile, the perfect balance of the scales, and the quiet peace that comes from a life lived with truth and integrity. She was the divine blueprint for a perfect world and the ultimate destination for a worthy soul. At the center of the Egyptian world lies the river, a ribbon of life. Its waters nourish the land, and its silt creates the fertile ground from which civilization springs. But this life-giving river also holds a deep and primal danger. It is the home of one of the world's most powerful and patient predators, the Nile crocodile. And in this creature of scales and teeth, the Egyptians saw the embodiment of a raw, untamable divine power. They saw the god Sobek. He was a god of immense antiquity, his worship dating back to the very dawn of Egyptian history. He represented the raw, unpredictable power of the Nile itself. He was depicted as a muscular man with the head of a formidable crocodile, or sometimes simply as a great crocodile, wearing an elaborate headdress of a sun disk and two tall, majestic plumes. His power was not subtle or intellectual. It was the direct, physical, and often violent power of nature. To understand Sobek, one must understand the crocodile. The Egyptians watched this creature with a mix of terror and profound respect. It was an apex predator, a master of its domain. It could lie perfectly still, hidden just beneath the surface of the water, for hours, a picture of immense patience. And then, in a blink of an eye, it could explode into a burst of terrifying and unstoppable action. This combination of patience and sudden, violent force was seen as a divine attribute. Because of this ferocious nature, Sobek was closely associated with the military and the power of the pharaoh. Egyptian soldiers would pray to him, hoping to be granted his strength, his aggression, and his impenetrable armor-like skin in battle. The pharaoh himself was often identified with Sobek, seen as the great hunter who, like the crocodile, would seize his enemies with an inescapable grip. But Sobek was not just a god of violence. In a paradox typical of the Egyptian mind, this fearsome creature was also a powerful symbol of fertility and creation. This connection came from the river itself. The annual inundation of the Nile, the great flood that deposited the life-giving black silt, was also the time when crocodiles were most active and would lay their eggs. And so, the crocodile became a potent symbol of the virility of the land and the continuation of life. Sobek was the one who made the fields green. In some of the oldest myths, Sobek plays a role in the very creation of the world. He was said to be the son of the great warrior creator goddess, Neith. In these tales, it was Sobek who emerged from the dark, primordial waters of Nun at the beginning of time and laid the cosmic eggs from which the world and the other gods would hatch. In this form, he is not a destroyer, but a primary creator. He also played a helpful, if minor, role in the great Osiris myth. After the good king had been dismembered by his brother Set, it was said that the goddess Isis needed help to find all the missing pieces. Some versions of the story say that it was Sobek, using his mastery of the river, who helped her retrieve the parts of her husband's body that had been cast into the water. In this role, the fearsome crocodile becomes a benevolent and restorative force, helping to bring order back from chaos. The worship of Sobek was widespread, but his main cult center was in the lush Fayum oasis, a region just west of the Nile that was filled with marshlands and a large lake, a perfect home for crocodiles. The capital of this region was called Shedit, a city the Greeks later named Crocodilopolis, the city of the crocodile. Here, in his great temple, the priests of Sobek kept a sacred living crocodile. This was no ordinary animal. It was believed to be the living incarnation of the god himself on earth. This sacred crocodile, named Petsuchos, which means he who belongs to Sobek, lived a life of unimaginable luxury. It resided in a special lake within the temple grounds, and the priests would feed it choice cuts of meat, wine, and honey cakes. Pilgrims would travel from all over Egypt to see the living god, leaving offerings and asking for his blessing. The great beast was adorned like a king, with gold rings in its ears and golden bracelets on its powerful legs. When one sacred crocodile died, it was mummified with all the pomp and ceremony of a pharaoh, and then replaced with a new one. And so, Sobek represents the Egyptians' deep understanding and respect for the untamed forces of nature. He was a god who was both creative and destructive, a protector and a threat. He was the embodiment of the Nile itself, the gentle, life-giving flood, but also the dark, mysterious depths where sudden danger could lurk. He was a reminder that even in their great ordered civilization, they were always living alongside a raw, primal power that had existed long before them, a power that could be honored and appeased, but never truly tamed.